My name is Ileana. Find out more about me in this video.
A man kneels on wet gravel outside a general store that has sold the same brand of coffee since before he was born. His hands are cracked at the knuckles, the nails black at the edges from motor grease that does not fully wash out anymore. A cart beside him holds a broken outboard motor, a coil of copper wire, a toolbox missing half its handle, and a folded tarp he sleeps under on nights he cannot afford to run the shed's small heater. He has not eaten since yesterday morning. He has stopped mentioning that fact to himself because mentioning it does not fix it, and he has learned this year that most things do not get fixed by naming them. A woman walks past first and does not look down at all, her eyes fixed on the middle distance the way people train themselves to look past anything that might ask something of them. A man in a delivery uniform tosses a few coins into the cart without breaking stride, the gesture more reflex than kindness, the kind of giving that exists to end an interaction rather than begin one. A teenager laughs at something on his phone and steps around him without registering he is a person at all. Then an old fisherman stops walking. He does not look away the way most people do, and he does not reach for his wallet either. He crouches down slowly, the way a man crouches when his knees have earned the right to complain about it, sets a thermos of coffee on the gravel, and asks if he has eaten today. The man says he has. He is lying. The fisherman does not believe him. He does not argue about it either. He leaves the thermos anyway, taps it twice like a small full stop at the end of a sentence, and walks on without waiting to be thanked, already talking to someone else about the tide. He does not know my name used to open every door in this town. He only knows I looked like I needed something, and that was enough for him. That is the first thing worth knowing about this place. Kindness here is not loud. It does not announce itself with a speech. It shows up as a thermos on wet gravel, and it keeps walking before you can turn it into a debt. This has not been one morning. It has been 11 months of mornings like this one, scattered across a calendar he stopped marking after the third month, because counting the days made the test feel like a sentence rather than a choice. He has learned the town's patterns the way he once learned shipping routes. He knows which businesses will let him sit inside out of the rain and which will ask him to move along before he has finished his coffee. He knows the church that leaves its side door unlocked on cold nights and the one that does not. He knows a boy of maybe 9 who once gave him half a sandwich without being told to by any parent standing nearby, and the parent who yanked that same boy's hand a week later on a different street, muttering something about strangers under her breath as if kindness itself needed correcting out of a child before it became a habit. He has been mocked more than he expected, in ways small enough that no one watching would call it cruelty. A group of men outside the bait shop who laughed at his cart and did not lower their voices. A woman who once tossed $1 into the dirt beside him rather than into his hand, so she would not have to touch anything he had touched. He has learned to absorb these moments the way you absorb weather, without letting them change the shape of the question he is actually asking, which was never about the town's average behavior. It was always about specific people, specific mornings, specific choices made when nothing was being watched. The second thing worth knowing is why a man who once signed contracts worth more than this entire harbor is kneeling on it now, cold, unshaven, invisible to most of the people who pass him. That part takes longer to explain. He believed, until recently, that he had a year to find his answer. He does not yet know he has far less time than that. His name is Daniel Marsh, and 11 months ago, he was still the kind of name people said with weight in their voice. The way you say a name attached to a building, a payroll, 100 families who depended on decisions made in a room they never entered. Marsh Maritime built half the working docks in this county and repaired the other half. His father ran it with a stubborn, unglamorous decency that made men loyal to him even on the days he was wrong, because he was wrong out loud and fixed it out loud too. Daniel inherited the company at 26, too young, too fast, still grieving a father he had not finished learning from, and he spent 8 years trying to run it the way his father would have, while privately suspecting he never quite managed it. Tone tense. He held it together longer than most people expected him to. Then came the hostile buyout, a phrase he had heard 100 times in other companies' stories and never once thought would attach itself to his own name. It came through a shareholder structure his own legal team had signed off on years earlier, a clause buried in language dense enough that nobody flagged what it would eventually cost him. And in the space of one fiscal quarter, he went from chairman to a name on a severance letter that required his own signature to finalize, because the company he had inherited required him to formally authorize its own theft of itself from him. He signed it in a conference room with a view of the harbor his family had built docks into a century earlier, and nobody in that room looked him in the eye while he did it. He remembers his father best in fragments now, the way grief eventually files a person down to a handful of specific moments instead of a whole life. His father teaching him to read a shipping manifest at the kitchen table before he was old enough to understand what half the numbers meant. His father shaking hands with dock workers by name, every single one, every single morning, because he believed a company that forgot the names of the people who kept it running had already started dying without noticing. His father telling him once, not long before the heart attack that took him at 58, that the Marsh name was never the point of the company. It was only ever the signature on something bigger than any one Marsh would ever be. Daniel spent 8 years trying to live up to a sentence he did not fully understand until the boardroom took the company out of his hands, and he finally had time to sit with what his father actually meant. He kept enough, not control, not the name on the building anymore, enough that he could disappear into anonymity and still eat, still pay rent on a shed at the wrong end of the harbor road, still have something waiting for him if he ever chose to fight to get it back through the courts, through the reversal clause his lawyers assured him was still technically alive for exactly 1 year from the date of the buyout. In the weeks right after the severance letter, he tried the ordinary things a man with resources tries. A rented apartment in a city 3 hours from anyone who knew his name, good enough furniture, a gym membership he used twice, dinners alone in restaurants where the staff called him sir without meaning anything by it. None of it answered the question that had started keeping him awake, which was not about the company at all by that point. It was about every relationship he had ever had, sorted quietly and involuntarily into two piles in his head: the people who would have stayed if the money left, and the people he was no longer certain about, a pile that kept growing the longer he sat with it, until he realized he was no longer certain about almost anyone from the life he had just lost. He chose not to fight yet. He chose something else first. He wanted to know, with a certainty money had never once let him have, whether anyone in this town had ever been kind to him because of who he actually was underneath the company, or only because of what the company could do for them. He could not run that test as Daniel Marsh, heir to a shipping fortune. Everyone in this town already had an answer ready for that man. So for 1 year, he became nobody, a repairman, a man who fixes radios and appliances and boat electronics out of a rented shed in the same town where he once grew up in the largest house on the hill, a house that now belongs to someone else and has a different color of paint on it, as if the town itself wanted to make sure nothing looked the same when he came back. Someone in this town already suspects something does not add up about him. He does not know who yet. He is about to find out that she has known for months. That night, across town, the lights are still on at Cole's hardware store, long after the sign has been flipped to closed. Marissa Cole sits in the back office with a folder of notes and photographs spread across the desk, a landline phone pressed against her shoulder, confirming a date with someone at the town council office. 2 days before a deadline she does not know exists yet, a deadline that belongs entirely to a man she has already decided is hiding something worse than she can currently prove. She circles the date on a paper calendar hard enough to tear it slightly, then smooths the tear flat with her thumb, an old habit from a woman who does not like leaving evidence of her own frustration lying around. Years ago, Daniel Marsh turned her down at a town function neither of them planned to matter as much as it ended up mattering, back when his name still meant something in this town, and hers meant less. He was polite about it, which somehow made it worse. The kind of gentle rejection that leaves nothing to be angry at directly, and everything to be angry about indirectly for years afterward. The town turned the moment into a story it still tells at slow moments, at church suppers and hardware counter small talk. The woman the rich man said no to, as if her worth had been decided in that one conversation and never revisited since. She tells herself what she is building now is about protecting her sister from a man with something to hide. Some of it is, not all of it, and she knows that, even if she has not said it out loud to anyone, including herself. She remembers the exact function it happened at, a fundraiser for the school library held in a building that no longer exists. The year she wore a dress she could not really afford because someone had told her Daniel Marsh might be there. She remembers asking him, plainly, if he would like to get coffee sometime, and she remembers his answer even now, word for word, the particular gentleness of it, which she has never been able to decide was a kindness or a wound dressed up as one. He said he did not think it would be fair to her, without explaining what he meant by fair, and walked away polite and untouched, while she stood holding a paper cup of punch in a dress she returned to the store 2 days later, tags reattached with shaking hands. The town found out within a week, the way towns this size always find out everything. For years afterward, at church suppers and hardware counter small talk, someone would eventually bring it up, gently, as a story rather than a wound. The woman the rich man said no to, laughing along because the alternative was to let them see it still cost her something. She built a life around being fine about it. She is not entirely certain, even now, that she ever was. Elena Cole teaches fourth grade at the same elementary school she attended as a child, in a building with the same chalk smell and the same undersized chairs, though the whiteboards are new and the radio in the corner of her classroom is not. She stayed in this town when most of her graduating class left for cities that promised more than a harbor town with one diner and a shrinking fishing fleet could offer. She has quietly stopped expecting anything unexpected to happen to her here, the way people stop checking a mailbox they have decided will not hold anything worth opening. The classroom radio has not worked in months, its speaker rattling static whenever a student bumps the shelf it sits on. She calls the number on the repair flyer taped to the community board outside the general store, not expecting much, mostly because her students keep asking when the morning songs are coming back. Daniel arrives with his toolbox and his practiced politeness, the kind that could read as either humility or distance, depending on how closely someone is looking. Elena does not perform warmth at him the way some people in town do when they want something specific from a stranger. She simply has it, plainly, without ceremony. She asks how his day has been, like she genuinely wants the answer, not like she is filling silence while he works. She remembers, from some passing conversation weeks earlier that he barely registered at the time, that he takes his coffee black, and mentions it without making a moment out of remembering it. He is watching, the way he has watched every person in this town for 11 months, for the exact instant her decency runs dry. It always comes eventually, in his experience. It came in boardrooms once people learned what a deal was actually worth to them. It came at his father's funeral, in the receiving line, when he watched people's condolences shift almost imperceptibly once they remembered what his family still controlled. It has come at some point from nearly everyone he has ever let close enough to test. It does not come from her. Not that morning, not in any of the small ways it usually announces itself. The radio catches under his hands, coughs static twice, then plays an old song neither of them expected to hear on a Tuesday morning in an empty classroom before the students arrive. For a few seconds, neither of them says anything. It is a small moment. It does not feel small. Elena laughs, surprised by her own laugh, and thanks him twice, once for the radio, and once, though she does not explain this part, for staying long enough to fix it properly instead of rushing. Her students arrive 20 minutes later and crowd around the shelf when the music starts, and one small girl in the front row asks Daniel, without any of the caution adults have learned to apply, whether he is a wizard. He tells her, seriously, that he is only a man who is patient with broken things, and the girl nods like this is an entirely acceptable answer, filing it away next to whatever else she has decided is true about the world that week. Elena watches this exchange from the doorway longer than the moment requires, something in her expression shifting slightly. Filed away too, though she does not name it yet, even to herself. He comes back the following month for a filing cabinet drawer that has been stuck since before Elena started teaching there, and the month after that for a window that will not latch against the harbor wind. Neither of them calls these visits anything in particular. Both of them notice there is always, somehow, one more small thing that needs fixing right around the time the last one stops needing him. That same week, 300 miles away, Ray Delacroix sits in an office too polished for the modest holding company he now runs on Daniel's behalf, the last visible remnant of what used to be Marsh Maritime's financial infrastructure. Daniel calls, as he does every Sunday evening without fail, and asks the same question he always asks. Has the reversal deadline moved? Therese tells him no, nothing has changed. It has changed. Ray has known for 3 weeks, the papers sitting in a folder he has not reopened since the day they arrived. He tells himself he is protecting a man who finally sounds, for the first time in a decade, like he is breathing at a normal pace, and that handing him back a countdown would hand him back the version of himself that disappeared entirely into work after his father's funeral and barely resurfaced for years. He tells himself this is loyalty. It is also, underneath that, a decision made for Daniel without asking Daniel, and Ray knows the difference, even if he is not ready to admit it yet. After the call ends, Ray stares at the folder on his desk with the true date circled in red ink and does not open it again that night, though his hand rests on the cover for longer than it needs to. Ray and Daniel met their first week of college, assigned to the same cramped dormitory room by an administrator who had no way of knowing what either of their families were worth or not worth. Ray was the first person Daniel ever met who did not already know the Marsh name, and for 2 years that ignorance was the closest thing to peace Daniel had ever felt around another person his own age. When Daniel's father died and the company swallowed every hour of his 20s, Ray was the one friend who did not disappear into the awkwardness that swallows most friendships when one person suddenly has more money and more grief than the other knows how to sit with. He simply stayed, showing up at the funeral in a suit that did not fit him quite right, and never once asked Daniel for anything the whole company was worth. That history is exactly why the lie sits so heavily in Ray's chest now. He has never once given Daniel a reason to doubt him in 15 years, and he is spending that entire reservoir of trust on 3 weeks of silence he cannot fully justify even to himself, no matter how many times he rehearses the reasoning in the mirror before a call. A week later, the diner is full at lunch. Every booth taken, the particular crowded of a Friday when the fishing boats come in early and everyone wants coffee at the same time. It is the kind of full that makes a man like Daniel want to eat standing outside, rather than take up space someone else might need. Elena waves him over to her booth anyway, over his quiet protest that people will look. She tells him plainly that she does not organize her life around what people choose to do with their eyes. He sits. Conversation around them dips for a moment, the particular quiet of a small town noticing something it already has half an opinion about. then rises again a moment later, because gossip in a place this size rarely stays interesting for longer than a minute before something else claims it. Elena mentions, without making it heavy, that her father died when she was young, a fishing accident the town still references sometimes, in the careful way small towns reference old grief, and that she has never quite lost the instinct to notice the people the rest of the town has already decided to stop noticing. It explains more about her in a single sentence than she realizes she is explaining. Across the street, through the diner's front window, Marissa watches them from the doorway of her store, arms crossed, saying nothing to the customer beside her, who has followed her gaze and is clearly waiting for a comment that does not come. She was building something with a man she believed had nothing, and I was letting her build it. That is the part I could not undo later, no matter what I did after the forum, no matter how the ending turned out. You cannot unlet something happen. Days after that, Elena is sick with a fever that keeps her flat on the couch for 2 days straight. Daniel walks her dog without being asked, twice a day, in weather that makes the harbor roads slick and cold, and brings soup he made himself, badly, thin and over-peppered, staying long enough each time to make certain she actually eats it rather than pushing it around the bowl to be polite. Nothing about any of it is designed to be seen by anyone. That is exactly what makes it land the way it does, for both of them, though neither says so directly. He realizes, sitting in her small kitchen while she drifts off mid-sentence on the couch, that somewhere in the last month this stopped being a test entirely. He cannot pinpoint the day it happened. He only knows it has happened, and that the careful experiment he started with a clear head and a fixed purpose has quietly ended somewhere he never planned for it to end, in a kitchen that smells like burnt garlic and cheap dish soap. Watching a woman sleep who does not know his real name is not the one on his work invoices. He stays until she wakes on her own. He says nothing about having stayed. Some things, he is learning, do not need to be said out loud to be true, and saying them too early can flatten them before they finish becoming real. In between, on a Thursday that means nothing to anyone but the two people involved, Daniel spends an entire afternoon at the home of an elderly widow named Louise Pruitt, fixing a furnace that has been failing intermittently since the start of the season. The kind of job that takes 3 hours and pays almost nothing because Louise can only afford almost nothing, and he does not once mention that fact or make her feel it. He replaces a part out of his own pocket without telling her, marks the invoice as included, and stays afterward to drink the tea she insists on making him, because refusing would cost her more than the tea itself is worth. Elena hears about this later, secondhand, from Louise herself at the grocery store, told not as gossip, but as simple fact, that nice young man who fixed my furnace and would not take proper payment for it. It is not the kind of story that ever reaches Marissa's folder of evidence, because it was never performed for anyone to record. At the hardware store that same week, Marissa confronts her sister directly for the first time about the repairman. She tells Elena, carefully, evenly, that the man is hiding something, that the math of his life does not add up, that a man does not simply appear in a town with no past anyone can name. Elena defends him on instinct alone, without asking what Marissa actually has, because asking would mean admitting she already suspects there is something too, and has chosen, so far, not to look at it directly. Marissa tells her the council forum will make everything clear whether Elena wants it to or not. Elena does not ask what forum, does not ask what date, does not ask what evidence. She lets the sentence pass like weather. That silence will cost her later, more than either sister understands standing in that hardware store aisle. That night, back in the shed, Daniel senses something shifting in the pressure of the town's air, the particular hum of a secret nearing its surface that anyone who has run a company learns to feel before they can name it. He calls Ray again, presses harder than he has in months. Ray hedges again, offers half an answer that satisfies nothing, and both men know it. It is town gossip, not Ray, and not Marissa directly. that finally puts the council forum date in front of Daniel, relayed secondhand through a customer dropping off a broken toaster who mentions it the way people mention weather, assuming everyone already knows. He hears the date before he understands what it will mean for him specifically. I thought I had a full year to decide who I wanted to become again. I did not know the decision had already been scheduled for me on someone else's calendar by someone who had never once asked me who I actually was underneath what she thought she already knew. Days before the forum, the town holds its harbor festival, string lights strung boat to boat over the water, a band playing on a platform built from the same dock planks Marsh Maritime supplied 30 years ago, a crowd loose and warm enough that no one is watching anyone too closely for once. Children run between the food stalls with the specific, unbothered energy of kids who know every adult present well enough to feel safe getting underfoot. Daniel stands at the edge of it for a while, the way he has stood at the edge of most things this year, and Elena finds him there, pulls him further in rather than letting him hover at the perimeter, the way she seems to do with anyone she has decided is worth keeping close. Elena takes Daniel's hand in front of people for the first time, an unguarded, entirely public gesture that neither of them planned in advance. It is the first time either of them has let this be visible to the town rather than kept inside a kitchen or a classroom after hours. He feels the particular dread of a man watching something good happen in real time while already grieving the version of it he suspects he is about to lose in a matter of days. Marissa watches this too, from across the square near the funnel cake stand, and something in her expression shifts from suspicion into something sharper, something closer to anger than she expected to feel. She turns and walks straight toward the council office without saying a word to anyone, leaving her sister laughing in the string lights behind her. There, she finalizes the format of the forum with the town clerk, insisting it happen fully in public, on the record, witnessed by the whole town rather than handled quietly in a side office the way the clerk initially suggests. She tells herself, walking out into the cold, that this is simply the responsible thing to do for a town that deserves to know who it is renting commercial space to. Under her breath, she adds that some debts get paid whether people want to pay them or not, and does not examine too closely whose debt she actually means. The night before the forum, Elena comes to the shed unannounced, letting herself in through the side door that never quite latches. She asks Daniel directly, plainly, without any preamble, if there is something he has not told her. He nearly tells her everything, gets as far as admitting there are things in his past he is not proud of, things he has been carrying quietly since long before he ever met her, and stops there, the rest of it caught behind his teeth, like a door he cannot quite push open. She tells him that whatever it is, she is not going anywhere, and says it with the flat certainty of someone who has already decided, privately, that she means it. He does not sleep that night. He has just been handed the exact reassurance he spent a year testing this entire town to find, and he cannot yet trust that it will survive contact with tomorrow. He thinks, lying awake with the shed's small heater ticking against the cold, about his father again, about a version of this same fear his father must have carried every time he shook a dock worker's hand, and wondered, privately, whether the loyalty in the grip was for him or for the paycheck behind him. His father never let the question stop him from shaking the hand. Daniel has spent 11 months learning, slower and more painfully than he expected, that the not knowing is the price of the handshake, not a reason to withhold it. The town hall is full the next evening, folding chairs pulled into every open space along the walls. More people crowded in than the forum usually draws, because word has spread through the diner and the church parking lot that something is about to happen, even if no one can say exactly what. Marissa stands and lays out her case in front of the room, presenting the evidence she has spent months collecting. A partial photograph, a name half remembered by an elderly resident who once did business with Marsh Maritime decades earlier, a pattern of cash withdrawals that do not match a repairman's modest income. She asks Daniel, directly, publicly, Whether he is who she now believes him to be, he answers. She confirms it, standing in front of the town, in front of Elena, in front of a room full of people who have spent a year handing him coins and coffee and pity without knowing what they were actually handing him. Daniel Marsh, the name that used to sit at the center of this harbor's economy on the side of the old company building downtown. The man who inherited it lost it in a boardroom that never once looked him in the eye and chose to disappear entirely into this room full of strangers rather than fight the easy, familiar way through lawyers and headlines and a press conference his father would have hated. Marissa asks a second question before the room settles, sharper than the first, asking why a man with resources still remaining would choose to let a town believe he had nothing. What that choice actually says about a person who lets other people hand over food money to a lie. It is a fair question. Daniel does not have a clean answer ready for it, and the silence before he attempts one says almost as much to the room as anything he manages to put into words. He tells them, plainly, that he needed to know if kindness in this town still existed without a reason attached to it, and that testing it this way was the only method he could think of that would not corrupt the results. Someone near the back mutters that he had no right to run an experiment on people's decency without asking their permission first, and a ripple of agreement moves through several rows behind that voice. He does not defend himself against it. Some of it, he privately admits, is true. Some of the room erupts into noise Daniel does not fully register, because he is not looking at the room. He is looking at Elena, 3 rows back, standing very still in a way that frightens him more than shouting would. Her face does not do what he braced himself for. It does not do anything he can read clearly in the 2 seconds he is given before she turns and walks out through the side doors without a word to anyone, not even her sister. What she is feeling in that moment is not primarily about the money, though she will spend the coming weeks sorting through how much of it is and is not. It is the specific, disorienting vertigo of realizing every ordinary moment of the last several months, the fixed radio, the soup, the hand held under string lights, happened while one half of the conversation was operating from information the other half did not have. She does not yet know whether that changes what any of it meant. She only knows, standing in the cold outside the town hall a minute later, that she needs to be somewhere he is not in order to find out, and that the town watching her decide this in real time is more than she can carry on top of everything else tonight. Marissa is not smiling, despite having gotten exactly what she came for. She built her entire case around proving fraud, some scheme worth exposing to protect the town's trust. What has come out instead bears no resemblance to what she predicted, and the surprise on her own face is as visible to the room as anyone else's. A woman holding a folder full of evidence that proved a different truth than the one she spent months preparing to reveal. Outside, in the parking lot, gravel crunching under his shoes, Ray's voice finally comes through Daniel's phone, honest at last, complete at last. The reversal deadline did not move by weeks the way Daniel believed all this time. It moved by months, back when Ray first found out and said nothing. What remains now is 2 days. Not the year Daniel thought he still had standing between him and a decision he was not ready to make. 2 griefs arrive in the same breath. Daniel stands alone in the town hall parking lot with Elena's porch light visible down one street and an airport 3 hours down the other. And for the first time in 11 months, he genuinely does not know which direction is the right one to walk in. At Elena's house, Marissa follows her sister inside uninvited, trying to offer comfort that Elena is not ready to accept from the one person responsible for how the evening unfolded. Elena tells her, flatly, standing in her own kitchen with her coat still on, that she got exactly what she wanted. Marissa, quieter than she has been at any point this entire week, admits she did not expect it to feel like this. Whatever winning was supposed to feel like, this is not it. Elena asks to be left alone. Marissa leaves without arguing, without a final word aimed at getting the last one in, for the first time in this entire story, choosing silence over being right. The next morning, Daniel stands at a departure gate with a boarding pass folded in one hand and does not move toward it when his flight is called. He has run the arithmetic of this decision a dozen times overnight. The version of himself that flies out this morning and fights for the company his father built, arriving in a boardroom exactly the way he once knew how to arrive, decisive, resourced, unstoppable, against the version that stays in a small rented shed in a town that just watched him get exposed in front of everyone he has come to care about. The math has never once, in any version he runs, told him clearly which choice is correct. It only tells him, eventually, which version of himself he is willing to keep being tomorrow morning and the morning after that. He steps aside, calls Ray, and instructs him to move forward with a restructuring plan that Daniel has been quietly shaping in the back of his mind for far longer than he has admitted to anyone, including himself. One that does not require him to be physically present in a boardroom to authorize it. He is staying in this town, not because he believes staying will fix anything with Elena, because leaving on a plane the way the old Daniel Marsh would have is a version of himself she never actually met, and he is finished being that version, whether or not staying wins her back. Days later, in an office 300 miles away, with Ray present in person and Daniel joining by video call from the shed, the restructuring becomes formal. Daniel signs away full personal control of what remains of Marsh Maritime and converts the bulk of his stake into a trust, one built specifically to fund the harbor infrastructure his family's company left struggling after the collapse. It is not a grand gesture performed for an audience. Elena is not there to see it. She does not even know it is happening while it happens. That is, deliberately, the entire point of doing it this way. Ray, off camera for a moment while paperwork prints, tells him quietly that the old Daniel would never have done this, would have fought to keep every share out of some obligation to a father who has been gone for a decade. Daniel tells him that is exactly why he is doing it now, finally, without anyone left to perform the decision for. The trust is modest by the standards of what Marsh Maritime once controlled, but it is enough to repair the two piers the town has been arguing about funding for 6 years, enough to keep the harbor's small fleet in working order for another generation of men like the fisherman who once handed a stranger a thermos without asking his name. Daniel asks that his own name stay off the paperwork entirely, listed only as a founding contribution rather than a Marsh family gift, a detail Ray argues against on principle and eventually accepts because he understands, watching Daniel say it over a shaky video connection from a rented shed, that this refusal is not modesty performed for anyone's benefit. It is simply the truest thing Daniel has done with the family name since he inherited it. Ray asks him, once the paperwork is filed and the call is winding down, whether it was worth it. The entire year, the disguise, the forum, all of it, weighed against what it cost him. Daniel does not answer right away. He looks past the camera toward the shed's open door, toward the harbor road outside, where a woman he has not spoken to in weeks sometimes walks her dog in the evenings, and tells Ray honestly that he will not know the answer to that question for a while yet, and that for the first time in a decade he is at peace with not knowing something on a deadline. In the days right after the forum, before any of the resolution arrives, Daniel walks through town the way he has walked through it for 11 months, and finds the town has not decided, uniformly, what to make of him now. Some doors that were open to him before close quietly. People who feel foolish for having pitied a man who did not need pity, their embarrassment curdling into something colder toward him rather than toward themselves. Other doors open wider than they ever did. People who find they respected him more for the year spent kneeling on gravel than they ever would have respected the name on the old company building. The fisherman who once handed him a thermos without asking his name finds him outside the general store again, says only that he always figured there was more to him than the cart led on, and does not ask a single question about the money, because the money was never what the thermos was about in the first place. Weeks pass in the ordinary way, weeks pass in a small town. The forum's noise fading the way small town noise always eventually fades, replaced by whatever new thing claims the diner's attention next. Elena does not call. Daniel does not chase her, though every part of the old version of him, the version that solved problems by throwing resources at them until they moved, wants badly to. He goes back to fixing radios, boat electronics, appliances no one else in town bothers repairing anymore, because the work was never really about the money in the first place. And neither, he has finally come to understand after 11 strange months, was anything else that actually mattered this year. Marissa reopens the hardware store the following Monday to find her sister waiting on the front step before opening hours, arms crossed against the morning cold. Elena tells her she is not there to forgive her yet, only to say that she understands now, better than she did the night of the forum, what it might have felt like to spend years being the story the town tells instead of a person the town actually sees. Marissa admits, for the first time in either of their memories, that she built the entire forum around proving something about Daniel because it was easier than admitting what she actually wanted was for someone, anyone, to finally take her seriously about something that mattered, and that using her sister's happiness to get there was a cost she had not let herself calculate honestly until she watched Elena's face in that room. They do not resolve everything standing there on the sidewalk in the cold. They start to, which in a family like theirs is its own kind of ending. The slow rebuilding of something that cracked rather than broke. She comes to the shed on an ordinary afternoon, weeks later, no warning, letting herself in through the same side door that never quite latches. She tells him she needed time, not an apology, not an explanation demanded of him on the spot, just time to sit with who he actually is against who the town spent a decade deciding he was, before she ever really knew him herself. She says that matters more to her now, the version she watched him become in a rented shed with nothing to gain from her, than whatever version he used to be worth on paper before she ever met him. She sits on the stool by the workbench while he works. He is fixing a radio that has already worked for an hour, has worked since before she arrived, and he keeps working on it anyway, out of habit rather than necessity, the way a man keeps his hands moving on something that no longer needs him, because his hands have not yet learned how to stop. She does not ask him to stop either. She just sits there, coat still on, in no particular hurry to leave, in a shed on the wrong end of a harbor road, in a town that once watched a man kneel on wet gravel and decide, without fully knowing it yet, who among them was actually worth trusting. Outside, the harbor is doing what it has always done at this hour, boats easing back in against a sky going the color of weak tea, gulls arguing over something not worth arguing over, the whole ordinary machinery of a small town that has no idea it once held, without noticing, the answer to a question one man spent a fortune's worth of time trying to ask honestly. Nobody outside this shed knows this particular afternoon matters. That is exactly the kind of afternoon he came here to find. That is exactly the kind of afternoon he came here to find. Some things you keep fixing long after they work, not because they are broken, because your hands remember what it felt like when they were, and some part of you is not ready yet to let that memory go quiet. Subscribe for more interesting video like this.